Good afternoon, viewers. Welcome to this series of lectures on European history, modern European history rather. I am Shankar Kumar. I teach history at Hindu College here in University of Delhi, and the theme that we would be taking up for discussion today happens to be the historiography of the French Revolution. This is divided into two parts, and presently we are discussing the first part of it. As you all know, or probably I'll have to explain little bit, historiography is little different from history proper. Historiography essentially is about the changing fashion of history writing about something, and here the theme in question is of course the French Revolution. Of course we know that it happened in 1789, it began in 1789 in France, and we are more than 200 years separated from the event now, and this happens to be an iconic event ever since it unfolded. So there have been several writers who have written about this event, the criticality of this event. This is also written in history as the harbinger of modernity in political sense of the term, and therefore it has a rich history of being written about for more than 200 years, and that's what we will be tracking today. You'd understand as a student of history that the significance of an event is not embedded in the event itself. The more we go away from the event in terms of time and space, we realize, in fact, the unfolding of events subsequent to the French Revolution made it all the more iconic. Or there would be some critics who would say that it is nothing of that sort, and we will discover today how it played out over its history of more than 200 years of being written about. And that's why I want to begin with bicentenary commemoration of the revolution in 1989 as the entry point to discuss this out. So this part would be the first part of our discussion, would essentially be about the two centenary celebrations, that is 1889 and 1989, and how we will discover by taking the snapshot of these two points, that is 100 years of the revolution and 200 years of the revolution, and how it was a changed situation over here. And that itself is a pointer to the fact that the history writing about French Revolution has undergone a lot of change. What are the factors behind it? What kind of ideological circumstances were there? What kind of justification the existing regime, the existing political regime at that point of time, that is 1889 and 1989, were trying to derive from commemoration of this event. And of course there are shared memories and new perspectives in the discipline of history that historians use to analyze it in a different way. So all these things converge all through more than 200 years of this event, and they have given a different flavor of historiography around the French Revolution. That's what we are going to track today. So in 1989, that is bicentenary celebration of the event in Paris, President Mitterrand had actually declared the revolution as being over. So as you can see on your slide, the revolution having been declared over in France, but the revolutionary commemoration was followed by a counter-revolutionary commemoration. So the radical aspect of change, the progressive aspect of change of the revolution was not the entire picture of the revolution. And as you'd say that the counter-revolutionary, or the the traditionalists, the monarchists, those who were anti-change at that point of time in 1789, that adherence to their spirit of participating in the revolution or countering it continues till date. And as late as 1989, you find that the bicentenary commemoration is immediately followed by a counter-revolutionary commemoration. So it's not closed. It's one thing to declare it over, declare it as being over by the political regime, but the social sensibilities were still live, and there is no closure to this. And therefore, the present state of history writing around the revolution happens to be a hodgepodge of quite a few perspectives and sensibilities and ideologies, and we would discover that. So Paris, at this instance, in 1989, which is 200 years after the revolution, was celebrated as the birthplace of modern principles of democracy and human rights and human aspirations to freedom and dignity. This is the official claim that the French president wanted to lay claim to through the bicentenary celebrations. Of course, the traditional you can say enemy of France, that is England, would not take it lightly, and we will see that these claims are being punctured, these claims are being pricked by the Prime Minister of England at that point of time, Margaret Thatcher. So what the French regime does in 1989 is it time and again cites the exalted ideals in the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizens, which was the first document that the revolutionaries produced, or those who had begun the revolution, they had produced as part of the third state, getting transformed into the National Assembly. And this was a very modern document, although the revolution was not only about it. We will see that, or we already know that beyond this, the radicalism, which hardly adhered to the principles of, or the bourgeois principles contained in the Declaration of the Rights of Man, that was something that immediately followed 1789. So it is followed by the ill-famed reign of terror, which is more about dictatorship, which is more about totalitarian kind of a regime, which killed citizens in the name of not being patriotic enough. The entire battery of French revolutionary leadership is exterminated, guillotined on some flimsy ground or the other. And France was at war with the neighboring states, Austria in particular, and that was a pretext good enough for the radical revolutionaries, the Jacobins, sans-culottes, and so forth, to pick up any leader or person who was not loyal enough, and loyal within quotes. So those avowed principles of freedom, equality, and so forth, fraternity and so forth, were just thrown out of the window for those 2 years of the reign of terror. Yet, in the bicentenary celebrations, it is the ideals of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizens that assumes significance and prominence. So there is a deliberate projection of this phase of the revolution, and that is what happens with every event that is sought to be celebrated by the subsequent regimes, because they have to derive legitimacy for their own rule and their own circumstances at that point of time. So the traditional protagonists and proxies of the revolution, who were participants in the great debate over the revolution's character and purpose, like say Danton and Robespierre, were to be set aside in 1989. Rather, it was Condorcet who was projected as the hero in 1989. We will see that when it came to 1889, it was Danton who was the hero, but in 1989 it is Condorcet who is supposed to be the main character, who is projected as the main character. How he is projected? He is projected as a savant, he is projected as a philosopher, reformer, as a moderate revolutionary who was the victim of the revolution that he failed to protect and control. So it is this milder version of the radicalism of the revolution that is sought to be grafted on public memory through this bicentenary celebration. Of course, it must be serving the then nature and image of the government in France in 1989. Margaret Thatcher, as I told you, the British Prime Minister at that point of time, of course, countered it. She countered the French claim to the paternity of the rights of man. She reminded the world of the reign of terror that the celebration was just not talking about, right? But that also is very much part of the collective memory of the revolution. So she is time and again equating 1789 with 1793, which is the middle of the reign of terror, and says that what do we understand of this revolution? What is it that it has bequeathed to humanity? Is it human rights? Because reign of terror was all about violation of the human rights. And please remember, in the bicentenary celebration, it is the Russia had or USSR had participated in the parade that was organized, and obviously the Russian participation in 1989 celebration was critiqued in terms of human rights issue, and a question was posed if it was any longer possible to see the 1917 revolution in Russia as the authentic future of 1789. So difficult questions with relation to the exalted claims in 1989 is posed to the people who are actually pushing or organizing the celebrations. So what we find is that while the tensions and contradictions of the commemoration had their own cultural and political dynamic, they were no less nourished by the tension and contradictions of the historical interpretation. It therefore, that is 1989 bicentenary celebration, it therefore reopened a very passionate historiographical debate over the revolution, and this is something that continues till date. And Edmund Burke versus Thomas Paine, that characterized the initial part of the writings around the French Revolution. Edmund Burke representing the traditional, point of view, and Thomas Paine the radical point of view, and they were almost the participant observers. So they are writing at the time when the revolution is unfolding, and at that point of time only these observers are writing about it. Similarly, Barnave and Damastre, so they also represented two polarity of opinions, Condorcet and Hegel. So they are some of the early writers, almost the first generation writers who had seen the event unfold, who had seen the revolution unfold by their own eyes. And they constitute the first batch of writers or thinkers who had responded to the need to accord some kind of historical identity and significance of a phenomenon that has seemed from its very beginning to demand and yet defy historical comprehension. So you have very polar opposite reactions to the event right from the beginning of the event. Right in the 1790s, people are writing about it in a different way. Some are, for example, the Romanticists like William Wordsworth, Beethoven, and so forth. They are welcoming the start of the revolution with open arms and almost celebrating it as beginning of liberty and realization of humanity and so forth. And very soon, when the reign of terror sets in, or when Napoleon assumes dictatorial tendencies, they get disenchanted with it, and that's something that represents the first batch of writers and thinkers who shared their opinion about the revolution. So even if we track the 19th century history of France, we find that thrice it had to declare itself a republic. There are repeatedly the French Republic was relapsing into dictatorship and monarchy, back to dictatorship, back to monarchy, back to republicanism, and so forth. It is only around 1870s that the Third Republic was formed, and it gave, for example, the first 5 years of the revolution itself gave France 3 different constitutions apart from the Bill of Rights and Citizens. So this is a very fractured kind of opinion that we get to see. Now, in 1889, which was the centenary celebration of the French Revolution in France, that had inaugurated, we just spoke of 1989, so I'm going back 100 years, and when we see 1889 as another stopover to understand the flavor of historiography around the revolution, we find that it inaugurated a new age in revolutionary historiography, dedicated to the marriage between republicanism and positivism that underlay the very creation of the Third Republic. As I said, that it is the existing political regime that seeks justification through a particular version of the revolution, which somehow in the public memory looms very large. So everyone tries to leverage that memory and tweak that memory in a particular way that ends up justifying the regime that they are serving. So this particular 1889 fervor with which the revolution was celebrated, or centenary celebrations were carried out, that is symbolized in the creation of a new chair in history. But remember, by this time history had become a discipline. Empiricism and positivism did underpin historical writing as a discipline, which was a borrow from natural sciences, and every realm of social probe or subjects that dealt with human domain or politics or society, they wanted to appear as scientific as possible. They wanted to ape almost the methodological rigor of sciences, if not possible, at least appear to be such. And history is no exception to that. And Marxism is a byproduct of that. Right? Marxism also takes a lot of pride in proclaiming itself as the science or a scientific inquiry of past and so forth. So that is very much evident, and we find that a new chair in history of the French Revolution at the Sorbonne University, of which Alphonse Allard was elected on that chair in 1899, that symbolized the Marxist grip over one particular version of the event, and that's why over the last 30 years and even beyond, we find that a series of writers, some his students, as we would discover, Lafave, Sobol, and so forth, they represent a succession of Marxist scholars who have given it the color of a bourgeois revolution, or have talked about the role of peasantry and so forth. So they gave a particular interpretation to the revolution, and that survived well till around the middle of, I would say, till around the first 3 quarters of the 20th century. It is only subsequently that we find some kind of a robust critique of the Marxist interpretation also. So we find that it is the creation of the universities and chairs, and who holds that chair would in ultimate analysis would be the one who would exercise some kind of a monopoly over the mainstream version of the revolution, and that's what happened to French Revolution. And in any case, the first quarter or the last quarter of the 19th century and the first quarter of the 20th century, the world over, is representative of Marxist grip in terms of analysis, and that's what is very much visible in the interpretation and historiography of the French Revolution. Also, we would talk about Georges Lafave and Albert Sobol, who carried the flag of Marxist interpretation of the French Revolution in the first 50 years of the 20th century. In the next series of discussion, or in the next part of the discussion that I am having with you. So, wait for the part 2 where we would elaborate on this. So, I will begin from this point and take it further to give a broader outline of the historiographical understanding of the revolution. So, this particular segment of the lecture was about the two centenary celebrations, the centenary celebration and bicentenary celebrations of the French Revolution, that is 1889 and 1989. And we used these two slices of time and circumstances to get a flavor of the changing fashion of history writing and other tangents that were contingent as these 2 points of time in the memory of the revolution. Thank you.